When talk turned to Haiti and countries in Africa at that meeting, he apparently said, this is a quote, "Why are we having all these people from shithole countries come here?" You can't dance around it. Those are the words of the President of the United States.
Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on.
Build that wall! Build that wall! Build that wall! Send them bastards back. I'm sure that paperwork comes in Spanish.
Ignorance and immigrants, they mix together!
Woo! Woo! If you don't speak English and don't contribute, get out.
In those institutional spaces. I want to talk about that. And the reason I want to focus on that is because the other part's easier, right? To talk about overt racism, we're only dealing, going back again to the iceberg metaphor, with maybe the 10% of the racism that we can easily see, and we're ignoring the 90%. So when I talk about that 90%, the systemic piece, the stuff that's under the waterline and that isn't even against the law that we sometimes miss, what am I talking about?
Canada has been really good at convincing itself and the world that the terrible things that come out of colonization somehow didn't happen here.
We have a Canada without the Indian Act. We don't have a Canada without residential schools or the reservation system. We don't have a Canada without slavery and segregation and all of the things that those produce.
There are these myths that we are so radically different from the US. Both countries are founded out of stolen and colonized land. Both countries have attempted genocide on indigenous peoples. Both countries have long histories of slavery.
Literally get our identities from our land. So we have more than a passing need for water. It's a spiritual, cultural relationship that has been interfered with. If the water's doing not well, human beings are going to reflect that.
Lack of support for First Nations. In particular, Indigenous Services was said to be using outdated policies and outdated funding models.
The policy was outdated. It was only an 80-20 model where sometimes the communities didn't have that extra 20. Some did, but some thought it was unfair. It is unfair.
All 49 First Nations he represents are grappling with overcrowding.
These communities are growing, and yet the government has not adjusted their policies or their funding structures to meet that growing demand.
Dr. Banerjee says the disconnect between medical staff and Indigenous patients stems from a lack of understanding around unique race and culture issues that the community faces.
When we come to the government and ask them about reconciliation, they're more than happy to celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day or, put an Indigenous name on a building. Mm-hmm. But when we say, hey, what about land? What about Aboriginal rights? What about treaty rights? What about getting our people out of prison? There's no action on that front.
The challenge I want to offer my fellow white people is changing the question from if to how. So dominant culture asks if I'm racist, and I want to change that question to How have I been shaped by the forces of racism? How is racism manifesting in my life?